The long drive through the deserted countryside was starting to take its toll. My eyes kept drooping shut, only to jerk back open at the last second. I decided to stop at the next gas station to get some coffee and walk around for a bit. Up ahead, the headlights illuminated a small gas station, its fluorescent lights cutting through the night. Pulling up to the single pump, the place looked deserted. Not surprising for 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. Through the grimy windows, I could make out aisles of snacks and a bored cashier sitting behind the counter, flipping through a magazine. As I got out to pump the gas, a strange, sickly sweet odor hit my nose. I looked around but couldn't locate the source. The smell seemed to be creeping from all directions, wafting in on the cold night air. I pumped the gas quickly and headed inside for some caffeine. A little bell jangled above the door announcing my entrance. The heavy-set cashier glanced up and nodded before returning to his magazine. As I walked further into the store, the smell from outside became almost overpowering, like rotting meat left out in the sun. Yet nothing seemed amiss in the tidy store. I grabbed a large coffee and bottled water from the coolers. The faint sound of static was buzzing through the quiet. As I approached the front counter, I realized it was coming from the little TV behind the cashier. The image kept flickering in and out. "Your TV isn't getting a signal all the way out here," I asked politely. The cashier turned and squinted at the snowy screen. "Dang satellites," he muttered. "Happens all the time lately." His voice sounded odd, slurred almost. I slid him some cash, and he opened the register with fumbling hands. As he handed me change, I noticed dark stains covering his fingertips. Were they bruises? "Have a good night," I offered as cheerily as I could manage while the strange smell filled my head. The cashier grunted in reply, his eyes looking glazed. I stepped outside, relieved to leave. To my surprise, the smell followed me, even stronger than before. As I hurried to my car, I peered into the darkness, looking for the source. Then my stomach turned to ice. Behind the gas station, shadowy forms shuffled about as if taking part in some grim ritual. I froze, praying I was imagining things. But the shapes continued to sway and spin, moving in a slow, twisted dance. I leaped into the car, gunned the engine, and sped off down the rural highway. In the rearview mirror, I could see several of the forms break away from the group and crawl rapidly after my car, moving in that awful stuttering gait. I pressed the pedal down hard, not letting up until the last bit of road disappeared behind me. Only then did I dare to breathe again. Trying to rationalize it away as fatigue-induced visions, I drove on as the night stretched endlessly ahead. I didn't stop at another gas station until the first light of dawn peeked over the horizon. The long cross-country drive was finally starting to wear on me. Driving all day through the remote heartland, getting lost on empty back roads far from any main highway. My GPS had stopped working miles ago, leaving me navigating by dead reckoning and luck. Now night was falling fast, and I was still deep in the middle of nowhere. The two-lane blacktop I was following cut through miles of cornfields set against the gloaming sky. Out here, the stars shone brilliantly without city lights to drown them out. I was utterly alone on the open road, my headlights illuminating little beyond the reach of the cracked and pitted asphalt. I shuddered as I recalled stories about travelers going missing along desolate rural routes, abducted never to be seen again. Shaking off the grim thoughts, I focused on driving. Just find the next town, gas up the old Sid, and grab some caffeine for the road, and get back to civilization. The fuel light had blinked on over an hour ago. I breathed a sigh of relief when I crested a hill and could make out the lights of a small town nestled in the distance. As I coasted down into the shallow valley, however, an unmarked dirt road branched off to the right into a dark thicket of trees. Just beyond the tree line, a faint orange glow beckoned. I hesitated. The sensible choice was to continue on to the farther town. Yet curiosity and dying hope that the glow might be a gas station led me to take the road less traveled. I'd just peek, then double back if needed. As the trees enclosed me, the tall grass brushing the car's underside, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. But soon a clearing opened up, revealing the source of the light. An old-fashioned gas station, pumps and all. Saved. The place had a vintage look, like something from the 1950s. Two ancient pumps stood before a small building with peeling paint and a battered screen door banging in the night breeze. All was quiet and still. I parked and headed for the building, hoping it wasn't just an abandoned relic. Stepping inside, I could see it was still in operation, though clearly past its prime. Behind a counter cluttered with odds and ends stood an elderly man in faded overalls. He nodded in greeting. "Howdy, stranger. What can I do for ya?" His voice sounded raspy, like a dusty old phonograph record. "Evening, sir," I replied. "I could use some gas and directions. Seems I'm a bit lost." "Not the first to get led astray out here," he said with a wink. "Old Charlie will hook you up." I paid for a full tank as Charlie ambled out to the pumps. Through the dirty window, I watched him fill up the car in the moonlight. Idly browsing the shelves, I spotted packs of vintage gum, weird off-brand snacks, and mechanics' tools that looked to be from another era. Just who was old Charlie? The pump outside clattered off, and Charlie came creaking back in. "She's all set, friend. Now whereabouts you heading to?" I showed him my route on a map I'd picked up earlier. He nodded knowingly and traced a path back to the main highway. I thanked him and turned to leave when he called out, "Best not linger around these parts come nightfall. Road gets mighty forsaken, and some claim strange things come out in the darkness." He gave me a grave look. Things from long ago. Unease crept up my spine as I looked at him staring back from the shadows. I thanked him again and hurried to my car, suddenly eager to put distance between me and that old station. Charlie watched me go from the window, unblinking, until I was swallowed by the trees. Soon I was barreling along the county highway, flanked by woods and wide fields. The miles ticked by and civilization remained nowhere in sight. Glancing at the gas gauge, the needle hadn't budged despite the full tank. Odd. I shook it off, again blaming an overactive mind. Eventually, even the farm fields ended, leaving nothing beyond the road's reach. No light except the hazy aura of my headlights before an impermeable darkness. The isolation preyed on my nerves. I flipped on the radio for company, but got only static. Then a faint shape emerged ahead at the limit of my vision. A hitchhiker, maybe. As I neared, details emerged. It was a young woman in a faded dress, thumb extended, on the wrong side of the road. My pulse spiked. Something was very wrong here. I sped past without slowing, unnerved by her vacant, staring eyes. Checking the mirror, she hadn't moved, just kept staring after me. The gas gauge absurdly still hadn't dropped. I wanted off this road. More shapes materialized ahead, shambling along the shoulder. A man towing a rusted bike, a little girl clutching a doll, an elderly couple holding hands. Their clothes old-fashioned, their movements stiff and awkward. My throat went dry. Were they lost spirits or some sort of mirages? I drove on, hyper-focused, unsure if swerving around them was wise. Their soulless eyes followed as I passed, but none made any attempt to approach the car. The road ahead took on an ominous cast. Then my heart seized. Up ahead, at a crossroads illuminated by a sole street lamp, stood dozens more shadowy figures, waiting or gathering. Their nebulous shapes milled about silently in the pale light. I knew with sudden certainty that whatever was happening here I had to avoid that crossroads. Veering onto the shoulder to bypass it, the car jolted violently, as if striking something solid. The engine made an awful noise, then died. I coasted to a halt mere yards from the waiting horde. For a long minute, I sat paralyzed, expecting the forms to surge toward the disheveled car. But none approached. They simply stood, perhaps watching, but making no move. With no other choice, I opened the door and got out, planning to make a run for it down the highway. But before I could react, the door slammed shut of its own accord. I was trapped inside. In desperation, I uselessly kept trying the handle, hitting the locking button. No use. Through the windows, the figures loomed closer, their faces devoid of life or pity at my plight. I sank back, praying this was only a nightmare I would wake from. The car suddenly shuddered, electronics going haywire, radio blaring static intercut with distorted voices. The locks snapped up and down like teeth. I curled into a ball, surrounded by phantoms wanting back into our world, wanting me. The assault continued until dawn's first light ghosted the horizon, and the shapes began dissolving, fading back into nothingness. The car's tantrum ceased and the locks relented. I leaped out onto the abandoned crossroads, wildly looking all around, unsure if I was truly safe. As the sun rose, only empty roads stretched out before me. I shook for a while, then began walking. Several miles later, as I crested a hill, paved road emerged on the horizon. I staggered towards it on weak legs, collapses when I reached it. A pair of truck headlights found me soon after, collapsed on a yellow line, begging for help. As the trucker called 911, I stared down at my arm, my skin prickling as if in memory. Carved there, crudely, were the words "Old Charlie." The icy Canadian backroad stretched on endlessly before me as I drove through the frigid night. Having left the main highway hours ago, there was nothing out here but dense, snow-covered forests on either side. Not a building or even a streetlight interrupted the desolate wilderness. I hadn't passed another car for the last 100 miles. The gaslight had been blinking ominously for the past half hour. If I didn't come across a gas station soon, I'd be stranded out here. I shivered, imagining myself freezing to death on the shoulder, waiting for help that would never arrive. Just as I was starting to lose hope, a faded wooden sign emerged from the darkness, announcing a historic village was just 5 kilometers up ahead. Thank God. Though the place was surely deserted this late, an old-timey town like that had to have gas pumps. I'd get filled up and be on my way. The town turned out to be only a few creaky wooden buildings clustered together in a clearing. A church, saloon, sheriff's office, general store. Their signs were so worn I could barely make out the fading lettering in my headlights. The old-fashioned structures could have been a movie set or a ghost town. I shuddered at the thought. No, it was just an outdated tourist trap. That's all. There had to be modern necessities around here somewhere. Cruising slowly past the darkened buildings, I finally came upon what I was seeking. A small gas station at the end of Main Street. The place was ancient, the old pumps rusty and leaking. Still, they should work. I got out and tried the first one. With some coaxing, the pump wheezed to life, slowly dripping gas into my tank. Engrossed in watching my progress, I didn't notice the figure approaching until it was almost upon me. I practically jumped out of my skin as an old man seemingly appeared from nowhere at my side, dressed in dirty overalls. His white hair was wild, and he stared at me intensely with pale eyes. "You're not from around here," he rasped. I nodded nervously. "Just passing through. Needed some gas." I figured this old village would still have sun. He continued staring silently before responding. "These parts ain't meant for passing through. You'd best not linger." With those foreboding words, he shuffled away. Unnerved, I turned back to the pump, willing it to go faster. I nearly cried with relief when I finally tore the nozzle out and jumped into the driver's seat, door already open. Slamming it shut, I turned the key eagerly, ready to get as far from this place as possible. But instead of starting, the car just cranked sluggishly and died. Again and again I tried as panic rose in my throat. It was no use. Somehow, impossibly, my fully functioning car would no longer start. I peered anxiously into the surrounding darkness. Where had the old man gone? The abandoned town was dead silent. Too silent and too dark. There should be ambient light on the horizon, but in every direction just seemed an impenetrable void. Swallowing hard, I pulled out my phone. No signal, of course. I was stranded alone in the middle of nowhere. With no other option, I left the car, hoping maybe someone inside one of the buildings could help me. The freezing air bit at my cheeks as I hurried down Main Street. Cupping my hands against the window of the general store, I peered inside. Nothing but inky darkness. Moving to the next building, I found the doors oddly missing. The interiors pitch black and lifeless. My nerves were fraying fast. I had to get out of here. Abandoning the car, I chose a random direction and started walking into the woods away from the town. The trees quickly swallowed me, the wooden structures disappearing from sight. I felt a bit better putting distance between me and that ghostly place. But I soon realized I had no idea if I was even heading back towards the main highway. Stopping beneath a towering pine, I pulled out my useless phone and turned in circles, trying to get my bearings. Nothing looked familiar. A snapping twig pulled my attention back to the present danger. I whirled around. "Who's there?" I called out shakily. Silence answered. Then another snap, closer this time. I turned towards the sound as an impossibly tall, emaciated figure stepped out from between the trees. It moved with a horrifyingly unnatural gait, its limbs bending in disturbing angles. In the darkness, its facial features were indistinguishable, but its eyes glowed faintly white, boring into me. A scream caught in my throat as more shapes began to emerge, nightmarish humanoid shadows forming a circle around me. I opened my mouth to cry for help, but suddenly couldn't make a sound. Nor could I move, utterly paralyzed. The circle of wraith-like beings closed in as I stood helpless. They caressed my face and arms with icy fingers, murmuring unintelligibly. This was no forest. I had stumbled into a whole other nightmare world. Their bony hands gripped me tightly, holding me still. I could only watch mutely as they prepared to pull me down into the darkness with them. But just before the freezing figures could spirit me away into oblivion, a distant church bell rang out, long and loud. At the sound, the phantom creatures recoiled with unearthly shrieks. Their grips loosened as they cowered from the bells. Seizing my chance, I broke free from their grasp and ran blindly through the woods, heedless of branches that tore at my clothes and skin. The clanging bells led me like a beacon back to the town's little church, its steeple faintly limned in moonlight. Slamming through the doors, I collapsed in a heap before the altar, making the sign of the cross with trembling hands. I stayed huddled there, praying feverishly, until dawn's first light seeped through the stained glass windows. When police finally arrived in the morning to find me half mad with panic, the town looked perfectly normal in the sunshine, a cheery tourist attraction. But I knew that sometimes the only thing protecting you from what lies in the dark is to stay in the light.